Je m'appelle Émilie Maillerin, je suis directrice adjointe du FMDV, le Fonds mondial pour le développement des villes. Nous sommes un réseau international.
And we are an international network of local authorities dedicated to promoting financing solutions and investments for urban development. I have the honor to have you and to moderate this session of Africa Climate Week organized by FMDV. Called Mobilizing Financing for Climatic Transitions in Cities and Territories in Africa. The question of financing local transition is a key to reach the objectives of Paris globally, and in particular in the context of the huge urban growth that we see in Africa. From now until 2030, we'll have to finance and build on the African continent more cities and infrastructures than everything that has been built in all the history. But we have a systemic failure of financing in Africa, despite different credits and financial instruments that have been put in place for the projects. The local authorities are not accessing sufficiently to the financing. So due to this gap, we can say that we have institutional frameworks that are not adapted, and the local authorities cannot respond to the needs of the fund to the funds. So basically, and here we see more obstacles in terms of adapting to the climatic change, which is a major challenge for the African cities. I have the honor to have today 11 panelists of high level who represent the diversity of the actors implicated in financing the climate actions in Africa. So we have Lord Mayors, executive secretaries from the United Nations, representatives of West African economic authorities, representatives of local authorities, partners for development, and private investors. They will be talking about policies and innovating the solutions in order to avoid the obstacles. So we have two panels. The first panel will be dedicated to innovative solutions, and the second panel will talk about the importance of multi-stakeholder partnerships. You can ask questions through the chat, and there will be a question and answers section at the end of each panel. I hope that you can hear the interpretation. I remind you that you have interpretation in French and in English. And now I'm extremely happy to show you the video of Mr. Gonzalo Munoz, who is a high champion of the United Nations for climate action. And we have the honor to see him introduce our section. Thank you.
Welcome everyone to the event today on unlocking finance for climate resilience in cities and territories in Africa during one of the most important climate moments of the continent, the Africa Regional Climate Week. It's a real pleasure to be here with all of you, and I especially thank FMDV, a longtime friend and active member of the Marrakesh Partnership, for hosting this significant event and for the opportunity to say a few words at the outset of your discussions. Last month's report from the IPCC was absolutely unequivocal. Recent changes in the climate are widespread, rapid, are intensifying, and are, of course, caused by human activity. Indeed, extreme weather events throughout the world have showed that climate change has no border nor exception. It affects everyone, everywhere, and cities and regions have experienced costly impacts of climate change on infrastructure, human livelihoods, health, and services. The UNFCCC NDC synthesis report recently released shows that current national plans put us on a path to increase emissions by 16% by 2030, not decrease by 45% as science dictates. So unless there are rapid, sustained, and large-scale reduction emissions coupled with climate-resilient infrastructure, a safe 1.5-degree resilient future will soon be beyond reach. To achieve this, we need everyone on board and supported, including, of course, cities and regions in the spirit of radical collaborations. Cities, we know, are absolutely crucial in the fight against climate change in so many ways. From transport to how we green more spaces in cities, how we plan cities to be more resilient to climate change, how we develop secure clean water supplies for growing population, especially those living in informal settlements, how we deal with heat stress, which is now to be a climate threat for cities around the whole world. So Africa's cities, we know, are growing at twice the global average. In 2050, we expect an additional 1 billion people to be living in African cities. The need then for buildings and infrastructures is only going to intensify. Construction, planned and unplanned, is underway. We know that in Africa, 80% of buildings needed in 2050 are yet to be built. That is a massive opportunity. However, there is the opportunity to build right from today and create green jobs, skills, and training and sustainable growth. To do this, Africa's cities and regions need to be more proactively supported. This is why, as the high-level climate action champions, together with my dear friend Nigel Topping from the UK, we're working with cities in the Cities Race to Resilience campaign to accelerate adaptation and resilience actions in all aspects of urban planning, and in the Race to Zero campaign to have emissions by 2030 and therefore be in the path to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050 at the very latest. The good news is that 65% of Africa's cities already have a resilient adaptation plan, including Lagos, the most populous city in Africa. And 82% of cities in Africa are taking action to protect their people, including flood mapping, tree planting, and of course, creating green space. Recent analysis by the IFC found over $1.5 trillion in climate investment opportunities in Saharan African cities, with the highest share in green buildings, meaning $768 billion. And of course, it's not only construction that concerns us with cities. A recent CDP study from May of this year found that 1 in 4 cities lack the funds to protect themselves from severe climate hazards like overheating, flooding, and water shortages. This, of course, shows that both the business and the moral case is absolutely clear. The transition to a sustainable and resilient future for urban environment in Africa requires greater financing. The Marrakesh Partnership Climate Action Pathways for Human Settlements and Finance Sectors, with critical input from FMDV, offers concrete roadmaps, solutions, and initiatives to accelerate this transition, including, for example, strengthening the role of subnational banks to scale up financing for local governments, communities, and other actors, in particular SMEs. Second, developing national programs on cities climate finance, and also developing vehicles for blended finance, all of which will be covered by our distinguished speakers in the session today. The finance pathway also highlights that we need to both, 1, transition finance, and 2, finance the transition. As such, we need all finance actors, banks, insurance, underwriters, asset owners, asset managers, stock exchange, credit rating agency, the entire system, thinking about and normalizing breakthroughs and realizing the opportunity and urgency to invest in urban development and resilience, particularly in African cities, as strategic lever to achieve the Paris Agreement goals. City and government leadership need to drive this process of drawing up investable plans with clear, organized asset classes and give potential investors the confidence to invest and wait for the returns to come in. This systems approach and multi-stakeholder partnership involving all actors across value chains is critical to drive the exponential change and the ambition loop we so desperately need. I am sure there will be many more sound and innovative solutions offered and discussed by the speakers today to put us on a path to keep a 1.5-degree resilient future alive for Africa in this critical moment ahead of COP26. Thank you very much.
Merci infiniment.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gonzalo Munoz. the high-level climate champion in the United Nations, for this inspiring message, talking about financing the climate transition for African cities. And thank you for presenting solutions that is promoted by the road maps of the different stakeholders in the Marrakesh action. This solution that is recognized by the UN, presented in COP26, will be tackled by our panel. So I'm very happy to open the first panel that is dedicated to innovative strategies and policies and solutions to put the conditions to finance the climate transition in cities and territories in Africa. And now I am asking Mr. Mohamed Boudra, the president of the Moroccan Association of Mayors, AMPCC, and the president of United Cities and Local Governments, who will be talking about the Moroccan National Climate Finance for supporting local and regional governments. Thank you very much, Madam Executive Director. I want to thank FMDV to allow me to talk in the names of the Moroccan cities, and especially this issue that is in the heart of our preoccupations. We entered in 2020 in the decade of all the dangers, all the crises, and all the opportunities, because we have a historic opportunity to really face our responsibilities vis-à-vis our planet and the future generations. We lack time, and we alone we will lose. So we have to work together. So that's why we have been engaged from the very beginning to act for climate, and we've proposed different scenarios for taking actions in the framework of the different challenges that we have in the different cities. So all the cities are going to help their states through their participation in the different COP meetings in order to show their solidarity and to promote their peer-to-peer peer expertise, and also to so the states and the different development partners need to put the work all in common. And it is through the climate action that we will have to work on because the next generations need this. And also we have the challenges of the localization and of the national determined contributions, and putting in place and implementing at a territorial level the actions is very important. I am the president of the Moroccan the Local Authorities Association, and I'll be talking about what we did. You know, the Kingdom of Morocco has a local political framework on climate, and we have an ambition that have never been seen in a developing country. This framework that is combined to a regionalization and decentralization process that saw the participation of the different stakeholders is going to put us in planners, in managers, in operators, and essential actors to carry out different public services such as urban planning, the management of waste, the energetic efficiency with the huge urbanization that we'll see in Africa. Energy efficiency is very important, sanitation, etc. So all this is based on the rights and responsibilities that are shared. So we have a capacity to co-generate institutional support systems, strategic systems to integrate the different cities and local authorities in putting in place the national political climate. So in March 2021, with the DGCT, the Ministry of the Interior, the Association of different regions in Morocco, and the World Fund for the Development of Cities, FMDV, we launched our program that wants to put a series of infranational climate actions between DGCT and MPCC, which is the association that I represent. So this program will allow first to to have a national plan to coordinate the different national stakeholders in order to really coordinate the different stakeholders at a regional and local level, to put an expert team in engineering projects and climate financing, and to create a pipeline of projects at local and regional level in order to connect them to the public and private finance institutions. This program has made a leap forward with the creation of a National Commission for Climate and Environment under the DGT and the different associations, with the cooperation of the Moroccan Center of Competencies for Climate Change. So this committee has all the stakeholders in Morocco who are working at a infranational level. This is a space of dialogue, of information, and institutional and strategic cooperation that will allow us to really implement all the text in concrete actions. And this program will allow us to put in place a hub of financial expertise for climate, helping the local authorities and organizing their projects in order to really reach the national and international funds through a pipeline of promotion of these local and regional projects that follow the climate standards. And I am the voice of all the Moroccan local mayors to say that we need to work all together in disseminating this approach, and I hope that you will have different initiatives. It is a new way of working with the local authorities to become champions for innovation. We need to replicate and copy all these different actions. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Boudra. As a matter of fact, Morocco is a pioneer for the national support to local authorities in order to prepare projects and to access finance funds for climate. So with this help of financial engineering added capacities, thank you very much for talking about your program that has been recognized by the United Nations. And I am happy to give the floor to Madame Yvonne Denise Aki-Sawyer, who's the mayor of Freetown in Sierra Leone. Madam Mayoress, could you talk about the financing of climate transition in your cities? What are the challenges, the barriers, and the solutions that you have developed? I give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you and to share our experiences here in Freetown. So in Freetown, we have been undertaking a development process, which we term Transform Freetown, since I became the mayor in 2018. It's a process which has looked at, brought all the community together, and we did first a needs assessment in order to end up with land on 4 clusters, 11 priority sectors, and 19 specific targets, with the very first of those clusters or those sectors being environmental management. But the theme of climate change and climate resilience really is woven through all of the other sectors. So whether it's talking about environmental management, where a key target is increasing vegetation cover by at least 50%, for which we're planting 1 million trees, or it's talking about sanitation, where we're increasing collection and thereby mitigating against methane gases, which is one of our major emitters, or it's dealing with urban mobility and transportation, where again, we are mitigating against poor air quality and emissions from transport by introducing a cable car system. That just gives you a flavor of what Transform Freetown is. These, excuse me, please, 11 priority sectors, 19 specific targets, with over 37 different initiatives to bring those targets, to achieve the targets, and with resilience woven throughout all of these clusters and and sectors. So with respect to financing, as you can imagine, this is a huge requires a huge financial outlay. And there are three main sources of finance. There is our own source revenue. And for that, one of our sector targets itself is around increasing revenue mobilization, for which we introduced a cadastre system, geomap the entire city, and moved from having 30,000 properties on our books paying property rates to over 120,000, with a commensurate increase in revenue of 5-fold. So own source finance is one of our sources, own source revenue, but it's not by any means the most significant. The second is private sector finance, bringing in, corporations, companies in on sustainable models. In some instances, it's doing a PPP with the city, and in other instances, it's a BOT. So the private sector is playing a role, but at the current time, our biggest source of financing is coming from development partner finance. So whether it's the FCDO or the EU or the FDB, grant financing is the biggest piece in this transition of our city, not just from the perspective of transformation in terms of urban development, but ensuring that this is done in a resilient and a green way. So that's where the financing comes from. And where are the barriers? Where do we see the challenges? We see challenges right across that piece. The first place is on the own source revenue. So we found a situation where we sought to move from a manual system to a digital system. A system where under 30% of the property rate owners were captured by the property rate system, to one where we have universal coverage. And that has come with resistance. It has also come with some challenge between ourselves and the central government, which led to us having our property rate system canceled for an entire year, which of course had significant ramifications for service delivery. We're past that now, but we continue to have to build on what is not only a system change, but a mindset change, because with our new system comes digitization, and therefore the closing of leakages, really. So the tightening of financial controls, which is sometimes resisted, and in our case is definitely resisted, but we are overcoming that. The other area of challenge is just in terms of access. So you will hear this often from city leaders. Most of the resource available, even though we are looking at development partner resource, many of those partners can only work through the city, with the city, through national governments. And this can bring a lot of red tape and delays. I'm going to highlight two of our interventions, which give you a contrast between something which has been fairly successful and something which has been challenging. The first one is Freetown, the Tree Town. So within our environmental management priority sector, we have as a target to increase vegetation cover by 50%. To do that, our initiative is to plant 1 million trees over 2 rainy seasons. We have been able to work with a combination, very small, of diaspora funding, very small of own source revenue, but a significant piece coming from the World Bank and the Global Environment Facility. And this has been something which has worked fairly well. And the Ministry of Finance is the central government counterpart, but in spite of some hiccups and some delays, I would regard this as successful. A second example, which really is food for thought and something that I will continue to use as an example of how we must not do climate finance, is the challenge we're facing in raising money for a cable car system. This is our major transport intervention, which will not only reduce greenhouse gas emissions from transportation, our second biggest emitter in the city, but will also increase economic productivity, will connect remote communities in hillsides, and generally improve the standard of living in the city. It is a climate intervention, but one for which we have spent 1.5 years trying to raise funding just for the project preparation stage. So we've done the groundwork, we've done the pre-feasibility, as a community, if we're going to be serious about making real impact at the city level as we move towards addressing the challenges of climate action. So the barriers are there. And I would say that this question of access to finance is also very often the challenge that is described by the financiers is project preparation. So we've been able to deal with that by developing and working with a mayor's delivery unit, a team of highly skilled technical experts, some of whom work pro bono, others of whom are paid for through project funds. So we know we don't have a problem with project preparation. And this is a model that we'd like to share with others as a way of ensuring that, you bring in some private sector skills, sometimes are needed in public sector spaces in order for us to get faster access to financing. So we've made sure the project preparation documents are well done, that they're available. And what we really need to do as a community now, as we look at climate finance, is ensure that there are faster routes to accessing the finance. We need these feasibility studies done. We need access to finance to come for all of the things that we all know are going to be necessary for both mitigation and adaptation at the city level. Thank you.
Merci infiniment,
Thank
Madame la
you so much, Madam Mayoress, for your extremely precious words. You are at the head of an important African city. Thank you so much for being so sincere, so about the challenges, the obstacles, but also the practices in terms of preparing the projects to your internal expertise. So we have the honor to listen to your testimony, and we hope that this will inspire people, and that you will be able also to work to overcome the different obstacles that you still have. And now I'm going to give the floor to Madame Karine de Fremont, who is the Director for Urban Transition in the French Development Agency. Can you talk about the systemic approach that the AFT is developing in order to help African cities in funding their climate actions? Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. I am extremely happy to participate in this panel in the name of the French Development Agency. Thank you for FMDV for this initiative and for your invitation. To act for climate and ecologic transition is mandatory, and the pandemic makes us much more convinced the human health depends on the planet's health. So that's why we need to work on both sides in order to reduce inequalities and keep on working for the sustainable development goals. There are things that are going in the good direction, so we are aware that we have to act fastly, and this is shared by many governments who are engaged in the Paris Agreement, but also the local decision makers who are closer to the population. So I have to thank the cities who work in coalition in order to work in reducing the gas emissions. And many times their actions are better than the states. And also this is shared by the private sector and also the public investment banks. So the financial summit that took place in Paris in November 2020 between different IFIs talked about different commitments for climate, but also the energy investments in order to double the presence of renewable energies, and also working on biodiversity, promoting solutions that are based on nature that can also be worked on in urban spaces. So that's why the French Development Agency wants to play a very important role. We want to be compatible 100% with the Paris Agreement. Paris Agreement means to analyze every single action in terms of its coherence, its resiliency, its low carbon emissions, and all the actions that we carry out. This is a very clear positioning in 2020, 2019. our group spent 3 billion euros for urban development projects in Africa. 2 billion euros were invested. We work with local authorities and want to go better, especially in the African continent. We know that the needs in the cities are significant. The local governments have a very important role to play, but we see that their margins for maneuvering are very limited. So that's why we have developed a systemic approach, as Emily said, that allows us to talk about all the different value chain in order to propose solutions that are adapted to each one. So the first objective is to reinforce the capacities of the cities for sustainable development actions, low emissions, and decarbonization. So we always have components of reinforcing the capacities of the different stakeholders. And also we have the campus that created training programs for piloting projects with the objective of reinforcing the competencies of many people locally, like local financing, urban planning, and urban services. And the second chapter, in order to help more efficiently the means of local authorities, we accompany the decentralization processes taken into account all the different specificities of each state, being those institutional, political, or legal. In order to really have good reforms, we have a dialogue, long-term dialogue with the local and national authorities through public policy loans. We have exchanges with French local authorities. For example, the city of Paris is going to support Johannesburg in its climate action, but also our actions are co-financed by different financiers, the World Bank, the European Bank, the African Development Bank, or American Development Bank. 40% of our projects are co-financed with other IFIs. And also we want to help the authorities in financing their investment programs. So we have a diversified financial offer to answer to all the needs of the different stakeholders, depending on the countries and the maturity of each local authority. We can propose help with the preparation of resilient and low carbon projects. In Sub-Saharan Africa, we have the CICLIA facility with the European Union and the Swiss Cooperation Agency to finance sectorial schemes, project preparation, and also technical help with the projects. And we helped around 30 African cities, and we can propose direct loans to the cities when the institutional context authorizes it. And this is a particularity of our agency. In Africa, for example, we helped in South Africa, Cape Town, Johannesburg, but also Dakar and Ouagadougou also. And we have sovereign loans to the states through loans or through subsidies to local authorities. And also we can finance loans through national or infranational banks and specialized financial institutions in the financing local authorities. In Morocco, for example, we helped the equipment fund for local authorities to finance Moroccan cities in South Africa. We helped the DBSA, Development Bank of South Africa. And also there is the support of also ProParco, which is our subsidiary that helps also different local authorities. So we now the small projects many times they have many obstacles, because in these intermediary cities we will have a very large urban development and concentration, but we have a very slow processes. So we have a lot of national plans that help secondary cities, and also through the financial instruments that I talked about. But the challenge is to diversify a lot more our offer and to favor the domestic loan market. market through the mobilization of the local stakeholders and the private banks. So we need to work with the commercial banks in order to show them that the local public sector does not show any risks, and we are developing guarantee tools in order to push these banks. So we want to create guarantee systems for the African public or private banks who would accept to give loans to local authorities that will be longer term loans. So the challenge here is to push them to be interested in this type of clients and to participate in the financing of urban structuring programs. And to finish, I want to say that more than ever, the question of financing cities is absolutely essential because they have the economic and social impacts of the COVID crisis. So the French Development Agency is evolving, and our intervention is adapting to the fast transformation of African cities in order to work on the climate resilience, but also on social resilience. Thank you so much, Karine, for talking about this integrated strategy in the African Development Agency that works on the whole value chain. We're talking about the institutional framework, the preparation of projects, reducing risk, intermediation. Also, your words are extremely inspiring. Thank you so much. And now I'm going to ask another partner for development, which is the African Development Bank, Mr. Marcus Meyer. You are a coordinator of the Urban and Municipal Development Fund of the African Development Bank. Would you please talk about the strategies and instruments to finance the city's climate transition that you have developed? I give the floor. Thank you.
Emily, are you able to show the slide I sent you? Thank you very much. And thanks, colleagues. It's a great pleasure to be here, and congratulations to Morocco, Freetown, the AFD for the great leadership in green city development on the continent. We're joining you just shortly behind, as we're just recently developed an urban kind of strategy, an urban trust fund, and the recent policy for being able to work with subnational entities. So we're rolling this out ambitiously, and so we're kind of looking forward and working on these things with some of you in the near future. I myself coordinate the Urban and Municipal Development Fund that aims to, let's say it like that, narrow some of those gaps in financing projects and preparing projects and developing these sort of local initiatives to increase financial solidity and markets. So I would like to invite you all to watch out this space and count on African Development Bank to work aggressively in the next years in this and supporting cities. Because if we're looking at the opening statement by our high-level champion and we take this at face value, then really we believe at the bank that we need to bring finance to scale to succeed. And us as a bank, we do see a couple of critical inputs that are necessary for us to be able to do that and for this to be achieved. So you asked the question on what strategies, policies, and solutions at these different levels we see, and I tried to come up with a little graphic on how best things should be. And after these 4 interesting interventions, we see a lot of these different points have already been very eloquently explained. So it's easier for me to come in from at the last speaker. Emily, the next slide, please. So I really think that it's for all different actor levels. The first step is really to look at what you can do yourself and to prepare this sort of massive ramp up and kind of going to scale on financing African green urban development. And at the local level, we believe that, you know, the key is not grants or, you know, pilot projects or so, but really to look into, you know, massive improving financial solidity of cities and helping them access capital markets. And there are very few but shining examples across the continent. You know, Joburg just launched a green bond, and there are very similar experiences that are noteworthy. Then this is a strategy that we believe should be in everybody's mind. At the policy level, Morocco has mentioned it very nicely. Also, Freetown maybe alluded to some of the challenges, is that there needs to be a multi-level dialogue between cities and national governments to get this going. You know, this is the policy landscape is at present so that very few cities are able to go to market directly. So this policy enabling this environment needs to be dealt with. You know, depending on the policy autonomy, solutions can be found to get over this. And solutions, we have heard, you know, Freetown as a shining example on how to improve municipal revenue. There are other cities. There is an opportunity to work with the private sector to get more kind of market finance and endemic finance available for investments. Then if you go to the next scale, you know, this is really what cities can do. And we're hearing a lot of these leading cities reporting exactly those different items as crucial. At the national level, we see that, you know, this is a national task. There's no city can do this alone to develop a functioning domestic capital market for cities. And this is nothing that is so easy as you can put it on a slide. It's a process over years. We have seen in the case of Morocco, maybe there are intermediaries you can work with. So this is all a process again that needs to be a long-term strategy. On the policies front, national governments need to assume their kind of leadership role on assuming urban tasks and assuming a role in urban development by creating this enabling environment, different sector policies, and ultimately advance fiscal decentralization. And some of the solutions that we heard or that we're seeing is, you know, changing or improving intergovernmental transfers, whether it's the frequency or the sort of transparency and the amounts, you know, creating national funds accessible for cities. You know, Rwanda has experimented with this, and the crucial role of national development banks and subnational development banks. We believe this is in the foreseeable future, a big group of actors that will be necessary to deliver finance at scale to cities. And then at the regional level, we at the African Development, this is just an example. For one DFI at the African Bank, we just gave ourselves this sort of new policy to work with subnational actors and municipalities in guidelines for subnational finance. So while we like to point out fingers sometimes, we also need to remind ourselves that we ourselves need to create the systems that funding can flow. Colleagues have mentioned these sort of, that we most likely or oftentimes prefer to work with national governments. So there needs to be also this shift in kind of clients and conversations with a new set of actors. This is something that we need to learn as well and get stronger in. And policies could be, you know, new policies for non-sovereign operations, could be regional capital markets. The AU is working on this, for example, and you know, ultimately transparency and exchange, as we do here today, is creating the sort of shining examples. Cities are following other cities across the continent with solutions, and this is, I think, something that needs to be followed and we need to nurture as well. And some of the solutions are, of course, the typical multi and bilateral climate funds, trust funds, and new financial tools to you know, AFD have mentioned this kind of risk facility, if I understand that rightly, and this is an exciting new tool to mobilize finance for investment in African cities. So I think some of these we're working on. We like to see more strongly in our client countries, and some of the solutions here are some of them we believe are very relevant for mobilizing finance at scale. So Emily, you can pull up the slide, and let me just add a word or two here to really think that the experience of cities, for example, like Freetown, cannot be overstated. And I have frequently colleagues from other cities on the line that want to emulate experiences like this. So let's not underestimate this sort of pull factor that is being created through forums like this. So big congratulations to get these solutions out and get them to scale. So I think with this, I would like to thank you for the attention and open for questions, and over from my side.
Merci infiniment, Marcus. Donc,
thank you so much, Marcus. The same as all the others, you have highlighted the importance of a systemic approach in order to respond to this systemic failure in the infra state level market. So to work in this framework of fiscal decentralization to develop an adapted fiscal framework, a better adaptation between the national and local levels. And also we talked about the national level role in order to support systemically the access to finance of local authorities beyond this institutional framework through actions of intermediation with the public development banks, especially the financing institutions, subnational development banks who are specialized in the financing of the local authorities, but also through innovation, financial innovation tools. So we are facing a complex issue, but the huge opportunity that we have is that there is a lot of innovation in the financing world. The only condition to work very well in a multi-actor framework, this will be the theme of the next panel. But before that, I propose for just a few minutes to exchange, if you wish to give your opinion or ask a question. Does any of the panelists wish to exchange information, to react to any of the words that we have heard? Any of the speakers wishes to take the floor? So in that case, we will move to the second panel that, as I told you, talks about the importance of developing multi-stakeholder, reinforced multi-stakeholder partnerships to work together in solving this systemic failure, especially through the financial intermediation, the development of blended finance instruments. And I will give the floor to Madam Dr. Barbara Samuels, who is an executive director of a global clearinghouse for development finance. And she will be talking about the main challenges and the best practices to reinforce local climate finance. Thank you very much, Madam Samuels. I give you the floor.
Thank you very much. It is indeed very exciting to be here, and I thank FMDV for bringing together everyone. And I have to say it's very exciting in the first panel to see a real model, a functioning system in Morocco that is poised to be able to develop a national urban policy with the collaboration across local governments, coupled with finance and expertise. So congratulations for that. That's very exciting. But if we go to the first slide, the agenda, I want to be able to point out how dysfunctional our market is today. between a huge supply of capital and a huge supply of demand, and yet we can't get deals done. So, Amia, can we go to the slides, please? So I would like to quickly go through 4 points. The first slide is the opportunities for finance against the challenges for finance. And per what I've been asked to talk about, what is it we need to do, best practices that we can do today? And I would argue that it has a lot to do with mindset changes, both in terms of understanding funding requirements, as well as how, as in the case of Morocco, we work together to get the finance that we need done. Next slide, please. So when we look at the opportunities, of course, Gonzalez in the very inspiring beginning talked about the urgency, but the fact is the money is there. This is what is so tragic about our current situation. There is a huge gathering of capital because we understand across both public and private providers of capital that climate is now. We have to work today. Two, there is a new understanding that local governments, local and regional governments are absolutely pivotal. Three, if you look at the climate policy initiative, you see there's a ton of finance, and it's important to recognize that most of it is from the private sector, very much provided through corporates that are project developers that are willing to put equity and debt in projects. And within that, as mentioned by our colleague from AFD, commercial banks, there's a lot of on-lending from development partners through local, in this case, African banks. So, and within this, it's surprising to note that national governments, including national development banks, really provide the bulk of the finance on the side. So we have a large spectrum of finance we have to get in. We also have, of course, have a huge advantage. Africa is the top of the agenda. There is an urgency, and there is money with combined grants and concessional finance with commercial finance that we can bring to the table in Africa. There's also the fact that there's a lot of business opportunities. We have all sorts of new actors that are available, including foundations and new funds. I'm sure Priti, who comes next, will talk about the International Municipal Investment Fund. And all of this is the opportunity for leapfrogging. We talk a lot about smart cities. There's also a lot of suppliers that want to get in the game and are very interested in Africa. So if we go to the next slide, we have to ask ourselves, why are we failing if we have all of this opportunity? And very quickly, one, it is very difficult to access finance for African local and regional governments because one, we've talked about it, own source revenue is not sufficient. We got to push on that front. With COVID, also the fiscal transfers from the national governments are down. So the traditional sources are not there while expenses are up. Absolutely pivotal. Development partners, it's very important. And the mayor of Freeport mentioned this. Most of development partner funding, the huge bulk of it goes through the Ministry of Finance and line ministries. So there is a functional disconnect between local governments and national government entities that have the finance. And of course, most African cities are not like Johannesburg. They can't issue no obligation bonds. So we have a difficulty that we can't do on balance sheet finance to African governments. We have limited availability of acceptable legal entities to both public and private sector entities. The ones that we can build on that could be possibly considered creditworthy are some of the very large cities, utilities, project developers, special purpose vehicles with ring-fenced revenues, public-private partnerships. We have to structure vehicles for finance. That is, you can also use intermediaries. As noticed, we can use national development banks, commercial banks, the key issue we all have to be aware of. If we think of the market as single city projects, we have a hard time because both the public and private sector need to have larger transaction sizes, ticket sizes. Usually the minimum is 25 million. So we have to deal with that right on. Also, of course, we have the risks. We have to credit enhance our deals. And as has been pointed out, we've really got to deal with the fact that this is complex stuff. Not only do we have the difficulty of putting together bankable projects, but we also have to look at smart climate technologies, processes, credit enhancements, and underlying all of this is resiliency planning. How are we smart enough? That's very hard to do at a city level. So next slide, please. So what can we do today? I would argue the first thing we need is a mindset change. We need to look square at what are the funding requirements of our development partners as well as the private sector. And so you really need to look at who in your country is considered an acceptable existing investment vehicle. And you can see, for example, in Kenya, finance is being provided by both commercial banks with the support of development partners that include subsidies as well as partial credit guarantees, but it's through the county utilities. You can also do adaptation looking at private sector entities to help in things like trees and the like. So the first thing is to do a scan. Where is the money? Where can it go to meet your local resiliency objectives? Who can actually sponsor your projects? You can too also create new investment vehicles. There is a long history of this. In Medellin in 1955, the city created a utility that now funds 30% of their expenses. In Brazil, São Paulo created a water and sanitation company that is now the largest one in the world. There are examples of how cities can work either alone if there's enough of a deal size, or together to create their own investment vehicles that can be funded. And again, there are ways to do this through the national government and through PPPs, SPVs, and the like. Third, that we have a lot of examples of where cities have worked with climate funds and other initiatives to raise funding. So for example, in South Africa, there is a waste diversion and energy efficiency program, again, at the national level, that was able to mobilize funding from both the Green Climate Fund and the NAMA facility. So we need to look at what are the actual pipes we need to build. Next slide. So in closing, I would argue that the mindset change, the corollary mindset changes, understand what financing requirements are, but then work together and multi-stakeholders to unlock the finance. So we have to define the ecosystem of including local governments as well as national governments that need to be part of this, and development partners, but also the private sector, including SMEs and the local banks and the pension funds and community service organizations, and of course the experts that can help you put together a bankable vehicle. It's very important in this, if you look at how you unite in partnerships, that local governments themselves in a country come together with using their bargaining power to build coalitions that are going to create the environment to be able to do deals, as well as pull together pooled facilities of projects that meet the required transaction size. It's also important to be able to get the attention of the large development partners and the private sector. So your critical success factors are, one, being very candid and aware of what the funding requirements are, looking at each transaction and demonstrating that it's creditworthy. And this is doing a financial model that shows that your operating costs are covered by the revenues and any subsidies that you can guarantee over the life of the project. 3, you have to look at a contribution, even if it's small, from own source revenues or the national government, from the community. You've got to be able to show there's political support with skin in the game. 4, you got to have an investment vehicle that has professional management and some kind of track record and data, especially for social impact investors. You've got to put your performance metrics in place and get data. So this comes to, for this mindset change, what do we need to do? We need to have foundational requirements. 1, bring together local governments at the local level, as you've seen in Morocco. You've got to be able to have money. In Canada, there's over $1 billion that have been raised to do local climate funds. We ought to be able to do that either through subnational banks or through other entities. We've got to have the money to scale. And of course, we need the expertise, urban finance hubs. And this is how it's worked worldwide. Let's do it in Africa. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Barbara, for this brilliant presentation. And I'm not going to summarize it, but I highlight the importance of changing the mindset in order to understand what are the prerequisites of financing local climate transition and the importance of developing mechanisms of aggregation and investment mechanisms also, and to develop multi-stakeholder solutions. Thank you for talking about 2 solutions that Mr. Munoz talked about when he talked about climate change, the local scale hubs for financing local authorities, and also the subnational development banks also that allow to diversify the different financing sources, catalyzing public, private, domestic, international funds to serve the local authorities. Thank you very much. And I am honored now to give the floor to Ms. Priti Sina, who's the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Capital Development Fund, and she'll be talking about the strategy in support of financing the African cities' climate transition. Ms. Sina, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Emily, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all excellencies, colleagues and friends. I'm really delighted and would like to thank the Global Fund for Cities Development, FMDV, for this opportunity for UNCDF and for myself as its Executive Secretary to present today on a very important topic. And thanks to Barbara Samuels, also a colleague and friend, about the valuable lessons she put forth. So at UNCDF, the UN Capital Development Fund, our vision is to really leverage and catalyze the development impact of capital to help in the growth and inclusiveness of particularly the least developed countries and further the other developing countries as well. So we take this mission very seriously, and we believe that will help achieve the sustainable development goals. And we feel that all the decisions and development actions linked to cities are a large part of this mandate. So I'd like to start my substantive comments based on that preface. We are a strong partner with African cities and local governments, and I would say even a champion of their potential to drive, for example, climate transition. At UNCDF, we have a number of initiatives to finance cities and the local governments at their level. And I'd like to share 4 examples with you today. The first one is called LOCAL, which stands for the Local Climate Adaptive Living Facility, which channels finance to the local governments, whether urban or rural, for locally led adaptation for climate change. It's an innovative mechanism that can be flexibly applied to meet local needs. Some 17 countries across Africa are implementing or designing their local implementation plans, and we are very proud of them. We consider them our close partners. And ministers from 4 countries on the continent, that is Benin, the Gambia, Niger, and Mozambique are locale ambassadors, demonstrating that the African commitment to locale and support for the results that it hopes to achieve and has achieved to date. Locale applies the principle of fiscal decentralization and effective local planning and public financial management to climate change. It combines performance-based climate resilience grants, which we are very proud of. It's a mechanism we have innovated and created at UNCDF, which ensure programming and verification of climate change expenditures at the local level with technical and capacity building support. Performance-based climate resilience grants provide a financial top-up to cover the additional costs of making investments in climate resilient projects, programs, policies. And these are channeled through existing government fiscal transfer systems, rather than being parallel or ad hoc structures. International climate finance is channeled through national treasuries, right down to the local level. National ministries are involved in regulating the system. Since its launch in 2011, Locale has mobilized over $100 million for locally led adaptation. Finance goes directly to local governments for them to fund locally identified climate adaptation measures. Typically, these are small infrastructure and development projects, but their impact can be transformative. Roads, bridges, and water infrastructure take climate change into account and are built to last, even transformative for communities and individuals alike. Indeed, Cameroon, where my fellow panelist Philippe Camille Akao will join us today, and from Uganda, our hosts for today, are both countries that are presently designing their locale interventions. The example number 2 is the IMF, the International Municipal Investment Fund. It is a unique bespoke fund designed and set up by UNCDF and the United Cities and Local Governments, UCLG, in collaboration with FMDV, to support cities and local governments in accessing national and international capital markets to finance investment projects that benefit the urban climate transition in developing countries. The fund is managed by Meridiam, and we will hear more about that from my fellow panelist, Emmanuel. But just to say that Meridiam is one of the largest global asset managers investing in infrastructure. The IMF was created as a financial instrument of the Malaga Global Coalition for Municipal Finance, co-led by UNCDF and UCLG in collaboration with FMDV. The Malaga Coalition is a unique alliance of a financial ecosystem that works for cities and local governments who play a critical role in achieving the sustainable development agendas, including the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. The ultimate goal is to enable cities and regions to access the public funding and private financing that they need to realize their full potential in provision of sustainable public services and infrastructure to drive the required transformation. To achieve that, UNCDF has also set up and manages a technical assistance facility for the IMF. The aim of this facility is to provide technical assistance to cities to help them finalize their investment projects, and where necessary, strengthen their capacity to access credit so that their investment project can be presented to the fund manager Meridiam with the best chance of success. This technical assistance facility is designed to support cities with investment projects of less than $25 million. It applies the UNCDF dual key pipeline development process to assess both the climate impact and the financial sustainability of the investment opportunities. Now I come to example 3, and I hope each of them is proving interesting and meaningful for you. The third example is the local transformative finance in Uganda. Climate resilience is a key component of other UNCDF actions in Africa and Asia. Staying with Uganda as an example, our local transformative finance practice is implementing the PIFUD program, which is designed to increase the ability of local governments and other sub-sovereign entities to address key urbanization challenges through access to sustainable source of capital financing. The program aims to improve the resilience and quality of work in LDC cities in Africa and Asia, especially for the poor. So in Uganda, we support the implementation of the program on integrated local finance for sustainable urban development, which I just mentioned, in the greater Kampala metropolitan area. And this aims to strengthen urban governance as well as prosperity and innovation in cities. It's a 4-year euro $4.16 million euro program funded by the European Union and co-led by the Kampala Capital City Authority and our hosts, the Global Fund for Cities Development, FMDV. Together, we are working towards 3 financing goals. First, to strengthen the enabling environment for local finance by supporting regulatory reform. Second, to scale up local finance to foster innovation and investment in sustainable and inclusive solutions by enhancing own source revenues. And third, to enhance investments for safe, affordable, smart, and low carbon services and infrastructure through robust, efficient, smart solutions. Now I come to my 4th example. It's on securitization. UNCDF is in the advanced stages of negotiation with a major African bank for a securitization platform that seeks to facilitate an increased investment in climate and green infrastructure in Africa. The ultimate vision is to provide access to capital for transformative, climate-sensitive infrastructure projects in sub-Saharan Africa economies, whether in LDC countries, low-income countries, low-middle-income countries, or upper-middle-income countries. How will we do this? Well, essentially, we bring together with our partner bank, we will bundle green investments and float a bond on the Johannesburg and London Stock Exchange, unlocking capital for new investments. We expect this will be a major contributor to the transformation of LDC economies into inclusive, diverse, and sustainable systems for human realization and planetary health, because it will alter the market dynamics and the price signals in the public market to mobilize fresh capital on terms required for transformative, green, and sustainable projects. In closing, I would like to stress that multi-stakeholder partnerships are quintessential to mobilizing funding to finance climate transition and urban transition in developing countries, particularly the least developed countries. I look forward to further collaboration with all the partners here on the call and listening in, and hope we can continue to work together on this important agenda. Thank you very much. Hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sina. We are honored to have you with us. And I want to thank you for the excellent collaboration that we have developed in the different initiatives that you just talked about now. Thank you so much. And we hope to continue these exchanges with you in the future. And now I'm going to ask Mr. Philippe Camille Akoa, who's the General Director of FECOM, who's the special fund for mutual assistance in Cameroon, and he is the president of the African Network of Financing Institutions for Local Authorities, and he'll be talking about this institution that we have talked about a lot from the very beginning of this meeting. Thank you so much. Thank you. I want to thank you. I want to thank the FMDV who associate FECOM and RIAFO, which is the network of the African local authorities financing institutions, to your panels. Thank you so much. So I'm going to talk about the 2 institutions that I represent, FECOM in Cameroon and RIAFO. To say that the financing institutions for local authorities are national, public, or private entities that put funds to help local authorities to finance infrastructures, equipments, and to offer services to the citizens. And they play a lot of roles, technical support, help to local authorities, reinforcing the capacity of the workers, and also mobilize resources. And they help them to mobilize their own resources, and also to help them to reach credit loans and also subsidies. So the World Fund for the Development of Cities in 2019 showed that there are 200 institutions in the world that are present in 58 countries, and they are key stakeholders for the donors, the development institutions, and the private investors who guarantee the sustainability of these investments. So these institutions have a national mandate and they're integrated within the national institutions. They receive every year a huge number of data about local resources, and they know about the local needs, and they serve as mediators and as a guarantee, and they can offer counterpart funds, and they also work on financial products and specific services adapted to regional and local governments. In terms of the African network for financing local authorities, I can say that in December 2014, considering that the local authorities financial banks were not recognized for their key role in decentralizing the financing for the local authorities. These institutions decided to create a network called the Network of the African Local Authorities Financial Institutions called the RIAFRO. So we have 12 financing institutions in 11 African countries: Burundi, Mali, Guinea, Niger, Cote d'Ivoire, Gabon, Senegal, Burkina Faso, Benin, and Cameroon. So RIAFRO is a unique cooperation platform, South-South cooperation, to share knowledge and expertise. And this allows these infra-national development banks to learn from each other, to diversify and to improve their support to local and regional authorities. So all the advocacy actions that we played at an international level with the help of FMDV. This was done in 2015. We reached major results through this action in the United Nations Conference on Urban Development, Habitat 3. These local institutions were recognized officially in October 2016 during the conference of the national, international public financing institutions, public-private, for a sustainable, inclusive, and resilient sustainable development. So we continued to evolve to allow these networks to be much better oriented towards helping and supporting the stakeholders. So that's why the FMDV and other partners launched in September 2019 in the framework of the United Nations Summit on Climate Initiative for the World Alliance of Local Financing Institutions that will group partners and other financing institutions in order to reach other regions like Latin America, Asia. So the actions of the Alliance are linked to the Paris Agreement goals. So we are positioning these institutions strategies as a strategic stakeholders in order to carry out actions. And during COP25 in Spain, we carry out a lot of advocacy actions and in many other places. So in terms of the FECOM, which is the Cameroon Fund, and I am its Director General, I want to say that Cameroon is the most urbanized sub-Saharan country with very important regional disparities. So we carried out a diagnosis to elaborate the strategy of the urban sectors in Cameroon, and we saw that there is an insufficiency in urban services. So that's why we needed to mobilize more the important stakeholders in the fund that we created more than 40 years, and that has been reorganized nowadays, and it is a public institution of an economic character, and it is autonomous, but it belongs to the decentralization ministry, and it mobilizes resources to finance regional and local projects. What I want to say also is that in the framework of the financial intermediation, FECOM, besides the state resources put at its disposal by the government, we work with different other institutions, the Development Cooperation Bank, the European Union, and different local projects in different cities in Cameroon. But what I want to say to conclude is that these financing institutions for local authorities that know very well the cities can really help orienting the funds and work on lowering the risks for international organizations, and these same local institutions can be resource mobilization tools for the partners and really help the states in terms of local investments. And I would ask also that these institutions, through the channel where they help local authorities, can also support them in their sustainable development efforts. Thank you very much, Mr. Aqua, for this brilliant presentation where you talked about the characteristics and the added value of the sub-national financial institutions in order to help the cities in their climate actions and investments. And I go back to what you said when you talked about the international advocacy actions that you carried out in order to inform everybody that the African experience of the first network of sub-national financial institutions inspired the creation of the same type of network in Latin America and the Caribbean, and which is a common financing network also. So Africa inspired Latin America and the Caribbean. And as a matter of fact, these alliances will show in the future the impact of their actions during the next COP meeting. Thank you so much. And now I'm happy to give the floor to Madame Anima Dassi, who is who represents the West African community, and she will be talking about the West African Economic and Monetary Union in its activity to support local governments in formulating projects and connecting them to financial partners. Thank you so much, Emily. So in the name of the Commissioner, Mr. Jonas Gbian, he is extremely and sincerely sorry for not being here because he thought about participating personally here, but he is preparing an extraordinary ministry meeting about opening the borders, and he could not be here with you. He is extremely sorry for not being here. Thank you so much for FMDV for inviting us to participate here. So Mr. Gbian just sends his condolences to Mr. Boudrois for the loss of Mr. Daoudi. As you all know, this panel is extremely interesting for us through the policy of climate action. We are fighting against climate change. You know that WAEMU is a very important platform in West Africa to talk about environmental aspects in their globality. We have been carrying out the same type of work in terms of water management, of the coast erosion, fighting against also the environmental development also, and the reduction of industrial and urban waste, and the adaptation to climate change. And you know that in WIMO, besides climate change and vulnerabilities, we can say that this situation in terms of diversification and in energy transition and food markets. So we have green energies that we can use for sustainable development. So a regional approach could really attract a lot more investments, because these resources are shared by different countries in a trans-border manner. So WIMO represent more than 8 countries, 150 million people, and our vocation is to fight against climate change, and also to attract international financing and canalize it towards the cities in order to help local authorities to invest in resilient infrastructures to fight climate change. So it is in this perspective that the Conference of Heads of States in WIMO created the Council of Local Authorities, which is a platform that will push to have a much better participation of local politicians in the climate fight, and to also mobilize the financing mechanisms with strategic partners like FMDV, the regional council of the financial markets and the African Development Bank and other financiers. You know that during this presidential meeting in WIMO, it has a climatic dimension that is extremely important, and so we are creating territorial climate plans also, and we met in Lomé with FMDV. We will organize an workshop, and there will be a bilateral convention with the African Development Bank in order to mobilize finance. So you see that WIMO is working on projects of adaptation, of mitigation also, and WIMO nowadays is the institution that works the most about these issues with the support of the 8 member countries, of the local authorities, of the sectorial Council of Ministers, the African Council of Ministers. So the financing mechanism that we're going to put in place, because we are validating this project now, is will be accompanied with a law on financing local projects, and also the regional program for decentralization. Many of our partners know this, and this regional program to support financial decentralization is accompanying the trans-border cooperation agreement between the different countries. We are mobilizing the stakeholders and the resources in the framework of this strategy. The president of our commission will be participating in a COP and will be having strategic meetings with partners. We are preparing this agenda of different meetings in Glasgow, the French Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Swiss cooperation, and many other very high-level meetings. This mechanism, we have been working on it since 2011, since COP21 in Paris, and we participated in the local authorities meeting that was organized in Paris under the presidency of Madame Anne Hidalgo, and this mechanism was identified as one of the main solutions for climate fight. So we are harmonized with the developments, with our populations, with the French Foreign Affairs Ministry. We are focusing on the marginalized neighborhoods, and we have identified pilot meetings in Aboubou in Côte d'Ivoire, in Saïdi in Senegal, and also the Niger neighborhoods along the Niger River in Niger, and Bama, a neighborhood in Burkina Faso, and also the Valley of Samandine. Dear participants, the Commission of the West African Economic and Monetary Union wants to thank all the participants of this panel that we need to have an integrated and global perspective on environment, because you know that today with the COVID-19 pandemic, the issue is still there. We need to act very fastly. We need to act well, and we need to focus on the most important projects that benefit immediately the populations in order to reduce not only the bad effects of climate change and the pandemics, but also to fight against another problem, which is the border safety problem that we are having. So my intervention will focus on this problem today, and we really are at your disposal to answer any questions. Thank you so much. And once again, thank you very much for our strategic partner, FMDV. Thank you to Emily, to all your team for your support. Thank you so much, Madame Sinsha Aminata, for your fantastic presentation. You talked about the added value of the regional organizations in order to help local authorities working also with the member states in order to make the legislation improve through community projects, and you recall the importance of giving the local authorities financial means in order to ensure stability and peace, especially in the transborder regions. So these are issues. The access to financing are technical, but they are crucial for sustainable development, but also the welfare of the populations. Thank you so much for your participation, and hope to see you very soon. And I'm happy to give the floor now to Madame Emmanuelle Nasse-Bridier, who is the Executive Director of the Urban Resilience Initiative in Meridiam, which is an assets manager, and she will be talking about the different vehicles for blended finance, public-private for urban investment. And she'll be talking about the initiative that the Executive Secretary of UNCDF talked about. Thank you so much, Emmanuel. Thank you, Emily, and thank you to all of you for this wealth of information. I'm extremely happy share with you this afternoon some of our ponderings on how we can help much better local authorities and municipalities in putting in place and implementing their agendas in order to have energy transition and a development that is more sustainable and inclusive of their communities. We talked about in this panel about the challenges and what's very clear and encouraging is the wealth of initiatives that we heard about today that all go towards achieving the same goal, to find a means to really solve this deficit of financing local authorities, and recognizing the importance of the role of local municipalities and stakeholders. I want to talk about Barbara Samuel's presentation and the 4 key points that she mentioned that I share perfectly with her. And I'll be talking about an initiative and also the initiative that Preeti Sina talked about. And as she said, it was within the Malaga coalition, and I will and Meridiam was the manager. I will talk about Meridiam. We are a developer, we are a manager and a financier for long-term projects everywhere in the world. We focus on covering the essential needs of the communities, being those local or national. And today we have around 100 assets that have been developed and managed, and that will be managed by Meridiam long term, because our model is to accompany the development and financing, but also the management of these infrastructure for the long term, because investment funds can go up to 25 years of life. So in this framework, we are happy to work in the framework of the objectives that were defined by the Malaga Convention, FMDV and CDF to really find appropriate solutions to cover the needs of local authorities. And I will go back to the aspects that Barbara Samuels mentioned, because they're absolutely key. And this is something that we share. I want to say that we are at a time where it is essential to change our state of mind, of mindset, and to reinforce our collaboration between private and public sectors. We talked about the challenges, the volumes that we have to deploy, the investment contracts that the private sector can have, and the gigantic needs that we have in order to cover the agenda for a transition towards a more sustainable economy and development. So when we look at the elements that we have to work on in order to make this link much clearer, the points that were mentioned by Barbara Samuels are very important. We need to understand perfectly all the different constraints and problems that we have at a local level in terms of implementation of the projects. On the other hand, what are the expectations of the private partners who participate in the development of these infrastructures? What is essential today is to really have partnerships with different stakeholders at the national and local level, but also with all the economic tissue that allows us to create this ecosystem. This ecosystem is absolutely paramount, because it will allow us from the very beginning for the private sector to understand the challenges, the objectives, and to find the adapted solutions to this. So we have certain initiatives and we have means to deploy in the preparation of the projects. We need to put the necessary resources, technical and financial, in order to carry out these feasibility studies. There are many feasibility studies that exist on concrete projects, but maybe what we should do today is to continue creating these feasibility studies, to put them in connection with how we are going to deliver these infrastructures. And here we have major challenges to understand how, based on these feasibility studies, we are going to take the best options in terms of development, the good options for the communities, and to really reach the goals of sustainability and resilience, but also to ensure the implementation of these infrastructures, their financing and their management long-term by private stakeholders. So in the preparation of the project, if we do all this, this will allow us to save time, energy and money in order to put these infrastructures and have them work in the best conditions. So we have to work all together from the very beginning to put mixed financing from the beginning, because we we need to understand, as Barbara said, what are the challenges and the decisions that we have to take in order to have the most efficient projects. And what we do with our partners is based on this approach. How can we work on structural elements at local level that we have to work on in order to implement in the best way possible these projects? And how can we work with the municipalities, local authorities in the conception of these projects, not as a unique project isolated, but as a series of projects that articulate all together in order to solve the identified problems. It is clear that at the local level, these problems are known. As we said at the beginning, the city's agendas were clearly studied and reported on very clearly. We identified what we need to do in order to reach these goals. The priorities have been identified. So what we need to do today is to organize a whole series of projects, big and small, that will make it possible for the community and the population the infrastructures that will improve in a sustainable way their life conditions, but also their conditions of accessing the essential infrastructures, energy, education, care, but also the capacity to have an energy transition in the best conditions possible. We need to work with the private sector in the preparation of the projects, putting in place structures for projects and financing that integrate in terms of mobility. We can take the example of putting in place, for example, a fast bus track or a cable car line. This is a project, but we need to integrate it in a reflection about a global traffic management system or a global parking lot system in order to find a way to improve this problem that was identified as a priority by the city. The second priority is to be able to work on adding these complementarities between public and private sector. So what does this mean? We have to be capable of have the private sector intervene where it is necessary in order to attract other private stakeholders and mobilize more investments there. So in the preparation phase, we need to implement the projects that are feasible financially, but that are capable of attracting more private stakeholders, being these builders or developers, giving them a capital structure that makes it possible to and viable to create this project. With this attraction capacity, we can show the private sector that these projects not only exist, but they are structured, that they can be also developed in the time. So we are going to create this trigger effect that will attract, based on a project, more and more contractors and investors who come from the private sector. So what is essential to us is to be very clear as for the objectives in terms of impact. So we need to work with the local authorities on the needs of their communities and also on the ways to really measure the expectations and the objectives for these communities. So it is important to have ambitious objectives in putting in place the resilience funds and the resilience initiatives. We need to define from the beginning, when we prepare the projects, the objectives that we're going to attain through these infrastructures in order from the design phase of these projects to be very clear with all the stakeholders, being these private or public, of the role of each one in attaining these goals, and to have a way to measure these goals in terms of their impact, sustainable development goals, but also from the point of view of achieving the recommendations that were made and the integration of local stakeholders. In the construction of this ecosystem, we believe that it is necessary to integrate all the different stakeholders, even the small and medium enterprises locally, to put in place solutions that are innovative, that contribute to create local jobs and markets, not only through putting in place companies for managing the waste, or also for development of plastics management structures, etc., but also to integrate the informal economy and all the different stakeholders who will contribute to create channels of work to ensure to reach the main goal, which is to help and benefit better and serve the needs of these communities. So in order to really carry out this change of mindset with our partners, being this UNCDF, FMDV, or all the others, we need to work on changing this mindset and work on win-win partnerships that take into account all the different problems of each one, and to find what everyone has best to offer in order to reach these objectives. Thank you so much, Emmanuel. It was extremely important to listen to a private actor point of view with this experience, because Meridiam is leader in financing urban structures in Africa. So it's extremely important to hear your voice and to know that these practices, these partnerships, public-private partnerships are possible and that they are developing. Thank you so much. And now I wish to call the last speaker. We wanted to give the floor to an African Lord Mayor for a last word, Mr. Kamal Alawo Adjayi, who is the mayor of Golfe 3 in Lomé in Togo. Could you talk about your experience and the recommendation in order to reinforce the financing the climatic resilience in African cities? Thank you very much. Thank you, dear Emily. Can you hear me? We can hear you perfectly, but we cannot see you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, now we can see you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm extremely happy to participate in this high-level panel. I would like first and foremost to talk about Golfe 3, which is the one of the most important neighborhoods in the capital in Togo. I want to talk about the challenges in terms of environment and improving the quality of life for the citizens. I'm very happy to listen to panel 1 and panel 2 on this issue of transition. And today we recognize the role of local authorities in the energy and ecological transition actions at a local and international level. The problem is that financing the action of local authorities is not following. I don't want to insist on this because we have heard this over and over during the presentations. So from a technical point of view, because I'm an engineer, but I'm a financier also. So what are the problems to access finance for local authorities? We need to highlight the fact that the national regulations are not harmonized with giving a better access to local authorities, especially with international financiers. And I have to highlight the fact also that the financing mechanisms internationally, like the Climate Fund or many other institutions, are extremely complex. I take the case of the Francophone Africa. We have the language barrier that is a problem because the majority of these funds and the information is in English, and we have the complexity of really adopting these mechanisms and working with them. So what do we need to do at a local level? We need to reinforce our advocacy at a national level, saying that our partners would love to talk to us directly. So what's important now is to be able to carry out concrete actions to fight against this climate problem that the whole world is facing. And we see more and more today that the local authorities are the best ones to understand this problem, because we know our communities, we know the sanitation situation, the social services, all, and the climate change, all these issues are linked. So that's why the local authorities need to be given a lot more important role. So the African local authorities are not prepared to really face these problems of international financing, because they're extremely complex for them. So we need to see with the national governments how we can put in place vehicles or mechanisms that are adapted to the local authorities in order for them to access these funds. And also all the local authorities need to work with the ministries of decentralization. So this is what we're going to do with FMDV, to put mechanisms that are adapted to define the mechanisms in order to attract international available funds. And also I want to highlight something that we do in Gulf 3 in Lomé. In Gulf 3, we have signed a partnership with CBOD in order to put investment mechanisms that are necessary to the operations related to carbon actions. And my country just ratified these tools, and technically we are not advancing. So that's why we need to put in place instruments that will allow us to really experiment and put them at the service of the whole country. The last years, there was a rise in the awareness related to climate and climate action. So we have to take into account climate in all our investment projects. And all this is linked, because today when we talk about the erosion of our coasts, and when we talk about sanitation, everything is linked to climate. And also the problem is how to find the adapted solutions. And I believe that these solutions, through actions like this meeting this afternoon, will allow us to pinpoint the solutions, because there are countries that are very well advanced, such as Morocco, for example. In Cameroon, I had the pleasure to listen to the director of FACECOM, who was talking about the tools for financing the local authorities. And today, globally, we need to mobilize in order to make sure that the voice of the local authorities is heard. The local authorities should not be seen just like entities who manage a territory, but the local authorities can participate in solving the national problems. So that's why we need to carry out advocacy actions at a higher level, such as at the United Nations level, etc. So to raise our voice, we should work at an international level, not only inside our nations. I want to thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'll be very happy to answer. Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. It was fantastic to finish with your testimony, because you are managing a city and you're an expert in finance. Thank you for your recommendation. I want to thank all the members of the panel for the high quality interventions and we see that this multi-stakeholder action is extremely important. It's very important to exchange information, to keep on developing operational exchange platforms. And now I'm going to give the floor to Jean-François Abot, who is the Executive Director of FMDV, for the last words. Thank you. Thank you so much, Emily. I want to thank all the members of both panels that were extremely rich, of very high quality speeches, and you have allowed us to represent the ecosystem that Emmanuel Nassau was talking about, of all the different stakeholders that have to do with local financing. So we see, and this is extremely important, that all the viewpoints went in the same direction. So we all understand that we have a sort of an alignment in the different words that we heard in climate action. I'm not going to repeat what has been said, but there are only 3 points that I want to highlight that FMDV also believes in the preparation of COP26, the Marrakesh partnership. 3 points. The first one is the importance to develop actions at the country level, not nationally, with all the stakeholders, the local authorities, the national governments, the local associations of local authorities, and also the private and public stakeholders, in order to mobilize the necessary funds for the climate transition for the territories. I believe that this type of approach will break the silos and will avoid to work project per project in an isolated manner, and it will help also the intermediary local authorities that many times are marginalized in the actions that have to do with financing climate transition. So we can work on capacity building, we can work to create an appropriate regulatory framework and environment. And the second point is reinforcing the intermediations in financing, being these entities, public or private. We had Mr. Aqua from FECOM who talked about the subnational development banks that are public banks that finance local authorities. These allow to attract international financing funds and to canalize them towards the local authorities who don't have access to this because their needs of investments are too low to reach this type of funds. So we need to reinforce this intermediation. We need to create a culture of financing at the scale of the territories, and this is absolutely essential. And we need to work with the blending finance, where we have seen after what we heard today, that the public funds cannot respond alone to the needs of the climate transition for the territories. We need to create partnerships between the public, private stakeholders, as Meridiam presented, and with the national and local authorities to have this blend between private and public funds in order to complete the needs. So the financiers cannot answer alone, so we need to create partnership for cooperation with private actors in order to work long term. And this blending finance approach will allow us also to break the silos between the different sectors, and will be working on a long-term investment logics and not a logic that is based on project per project. And many times partners. This logic that we see today breaks the momentum in climate transition financing. So these points FMDV is working on with its partners, and many of the panelists today represented many partners. That we believe that dialogue and exchange are something very important on financing climate transition. We will organize with the government of Côte d'Ivoire the first summit on financing climate transition for African cities in 2022, maybe at the end of the first quarter or beginning of the second quarter in 2022, to have a political and strategic dialogue thinking about how we can work all together, because we have developed solutions with the different public-private partners, the United Nations. So we had UNCDF secretary today talking about the fantastic work that we have done together. So we need to talk about what we have now and to create a marketplace where the ministries and the local authorities can present their projects, but also the technical and financial partners, they can present their solutions in this marketplace. And we will see how we can create these partnerships concretely, following the needs of the different territories. We'll get back to you with this event that we'll be organizing next year. We will inform you. And we hope that all the partners and all the participants today will be able to join us next year. Thank you so much again for your participation as speakers or as participants in this meeting, and hope to see you in COP26 very soon now in Glasgow. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.